97.3 ESPN presents The Sports Bash with Mike Gill. It's time for Football at 4 with Geoff Mosher, powered by InsideTheBirds.com.
We expect to win every time we step on the field. That's just the mindset that we have.
Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, it's Football at 4.
Football at 4, powered by Inside the Birds podcast, drops every Monday and Wednesday. Also, a bonus podcast dropped this morning, their special interview with Chiefs GM Brett Veach. So, the Inside the Birds guys, Geoff Mosher, Adam Kaplan, they're dropping so much content, you have nothing else better to do except for, in the morning, you listen to the Inside the Birds podcast and you spend the afternoon watching the Phillies. You watch the Sixers at 6:30. You watch the Flyers after that. You got nothing else better to do except for consume all that stuff, and you can start the day with the Inside the Birds podcast.
Hearing that just puts a smile on my face. The last 4.5 months we've been talking about what if, sports coming back, all that. Now look at us. Overload.
Geoff Mosher joins us every Monday and Wednesday for Football at 4. Football at 4 being brought to you by PlaySugarHouse.com. Inside the Birds pod. Geoff, I thoroughly enjoyed your guys' conversation with Brett Veach. I encourage everybody to listen to it.
Yeah, that was a fun interview. I'm glad you guys were able to tell your listeners about it. It's not often that people who are outside of the Kansas City area can get a Super Bowl champion general manager from the Chiefs on with you to talk about building the Chiefs into a champion. And obviously, Brett has great local ties. He's a University of Delaware Blue Hen standout. Then he was an intern for Andy Reid when Andy was here. And then he came back, left a job in the UD administration, football administration, to come back and work for Andy as a very low-level assistant, and then worked his way up the scouting chain, and then went with Andy to Kansas City and worked his way up to general manager. And Brett has been credited, and he won't say it, but people who have worked with him will. They give him a lot of credit for the Eagles being big on Deshaun Jackson coming out of college, on LaShawn McCoy, because at the time I believe he was doing the Midwest, and Pittsburgh kind of falls into that Eastern Midwest region. And then he moved to the Southeast, and, Fletcher Cox came from there. It was a big Brett guy. And, of course, to go to Kansas City and look at all the talent that they've developed there, starting, of course, with Patrick Mahomes, but some good offensive linemen. Chris Jones, defensive tackle, who's one of the best in the country, also came out of the Southeast Conference and wasn't even a first-round pick. I believe it was a second or a third. So they've done a really nice job building a champion there with Andy. And to get Brett on, to have him talk about everything that went into it and his philosophies. We talked analytics. We talked about how he goes about putting together his scouting staff, what they're going to do this year with COVID impacting, scouting and personnel and everything on down. So it was a great conversation. I'm glad we were able to put it on the podcast feed also for everybody to get a listen.
One thing I wanted to ask you about that he stated, because he touches on all of his relationships, all people he's worked with over the years, and I want to kind of flip it to the Eagles specifically. He mentioned about how, as a person who evaluates talent, one of the things he learned was that how important it is to look at a guy's character, how he fits an organization, how he fits into what the team is trying to build. And I feel like that directly relates to what we've seen with Doug and Howie in this organization over the last 4 years, Geoff.
Yeah. And, to be fair, I think what he says is you have to look at, you want to build a locker room of good people. And Andy Reid has always been a big proponent of that. But at the same time, you don't just not take a player because you may have a past history. And I think obviously the Tyreek Hill situation comes to mind with them. And they, obviously went through it with Kareem Hunt as well, who's not with the team anymore. So you are always going to run into situations where no matter how hard you try to build a team of, wonderful model citizens, all 53, that's not going to happen. But, Patrick Mahomes is your leader. And by all accounts, he's a smart kid, a great kid, the perfect type of guy you want playing quarterback for you. And there's a lot of guys, they're one of their offensive linemen who opted out this year, whose name I have a difficult time pronouncing, right? It's French, I believe, LDT, they call him. He's a doctor, so he's a smart guy. clearly. And they have put together a team that plays hard, plays smart, and generally has good players in the locker room. And they win a championship. Obviously they took a gamble on Frank Clark, who I believe came from Michigan and had some incidents there before he went to Seattle and had success in Seattle. So they'll take the risk. But what they really want to do is build a locker room culture of guys who are devoted to football and are generally going to be good players inside the locker room.
By the way, that's Laurent Duvernay-Tardif. So
you're better than I am, Josh. I have a history of butchering names. So I knew I could get the Laurent correctly, but I just wanted to go with the LDT to make it much easier.
Just remember, you are a full job working and you have kids. So
yeah.
I don't have kids, so when I'm done working, I can spend my useless hours watching sports and looking up pronunciations.
How about that? That's what
life.
Josh does when he's not on the radio, is look up pronunciations. Now,
I would expect nothing less from Josh, by the way, having gotten to know Josh very well. And I pronounce my own children's names wrong.
Oh,
so,
well, that's bad.
Thank you
that's
for
bad job by
understanding
you.
The adversity that I am under every single day, especially with the kids at home.
That's incredible. Let's get to some stuff with the Philadelphia Eagles, specifically Miles Sanders. What do we know about Miles Sanders being week to week, and how do you think that this impacts him for the start of the season?
Well, I don't have exact specific information further than what the team gave out as far as lower body injury, but I can tell you I've looked into it, and what I'm told about many of these injuries, Miles included, is that they're not significant injuries to the point where there should be some real doubt as to whether they're going to be available for the season. Okay. I mean, that obviously is across the board. I know there's a lot of different players with different injuries. So maybe one or two maybe have it more severe than the other. But as far as I was told, a lot of this is precaution. You got to remember, you've got it's almost doubly important this year to keep your players ready and healthy for the game, because who knows what's going to happen when the season starts with the testing and everything like that. So for guys who have been here already, Miles Sanders, Jalen Mills, for example, even Javon Hargrave, because he's played in the league for a couple of years. The concern on the team side is, let's just get these guys to the finish line of training camp and to be ready for the opener. They don't really have to learn a whole lot. Miles came into camp, we talked about this last week, ready to go. And I think you've heard it from Duce Staley, from Doug, from everybody who's been around him. The kid looks like the game is just coming so naturally to him. So if he tweaks something, they're not going to sit there and rush to get him out there. They want him healthy for the season, and they know what he can do, and that he doesn't need some catch-up time in the playbook. It's really rookies that you really want to keep healthy, because they have the biggest bridge to gap and the most learning to do. And so far, it seems like the rookies are out there and undaunted so far. So that's good. As I told you guys last time I was on Monday, the Hargrave thing did happen off the field. It was a weight room injury. It was the pec. They felt like they dodged a bullet, meaning that it wasn't torn, which would have probably extended into the season, if not missed the season, right? I think that's what Malik Jackson did in week 1 last year. So it's a strain. He should be all right, should be ready to go. And again, he's the type of guy that, you would love to have him in camp, but Jim Schwartz does not run a very complex scheme for his linemen. It's pretty much go get the quarterback, and that's what Javon Hargrave knows how to do. So I don't think he'll be very behind when season starts.
Getting back to the running back, does it say anything to you at all that with Miles Sanders and Boston Scott having a day off today, that the two main running backs out there with the first team were Corey Clement and the rookie Mike Warren?
No, I think that's kind of normal. I guess maybe you'd want to see Elijah Holyfield, or thought you would see Elijah Holyfield get more work with the first. But to be honest with you, nothing's given to anybody, and they're going to go with experience right now. And the experience is obviously Corey Clement, who has also reported to camp in great shape. I believe it was Miles Sanders who came out and said he looks like Super Bowl Corey. Now, that's rhetoric or hyperbole, whatever you want to say. But the bottom line is Corey's been on this team for the last 3 years, and he's probably even more so than Boston Scott, maybe built to take on the lead role if Miles Sanders were to be hurt for a game or 2 or 3. So not surprising to me to see Corey get a majority of the reps with the starters. And Mike Warren's a guy who, they like out of Cincinnati. He breaks tackles. He runs smoothly. He runs swiftly. I think we talked about this in the months ago when after the draft, as far as who are some rookie free agents that stood a really good shot to make the team, and he's one that the name kept coming up just because they felt like, as Duce Staley said, he's a big guy, but he doesn't necessarily just rumble like a big guy. He's got some moves, so I'm sure they want to get a good look at a guy like that to see what he can do.
One position that I had my eyes on throughout this training camp is that outside corner position. And Avonte Maddox has started with Darius Slay the first 2 days in pads, and he was very open, Avonte Maddox was, about how Darius Slay has been helping him. Do you think that impact of Darius Slay when it comes to that other outside corner, knowledge of the game, just being a veteran, will help Avonte Maddox maybe thrive in that spot?
I hope so. Some players are really easy to learn from just by tapping on their shoulder and asking questions. Others you kind of have to learn from just by watching. And so it's all about the individual. And Avonte Maddox, I have come to see him as someone who is studious of the game, as a very smart football player, good FBI football intelligence. And it doesn't surprise me that he's the type of player that's going to look at Darius Slay, take mental notes, ask questions. He doesn't have the closing speed, doesn't have the athleticism, this athletic speed that Darius Slay has, but that doesn't mean he can't learn tricks of the trade and press technique and, just kind of tap into what makes Darius Slay a good corner and try to replicate some of those things. So that doesn't surprise me at all, nor does it surprise me that Avonte Maddox is your CB2 opposite Slay so far in camp. We'll see if Sidney Jones gets some reps with the ones, but the coaches have to do two things, right? They've got to figure out some of the job jockeying going on, but they also have to prepare for the season. It's less than a month away. And if they felt from the start that Avonte Maddox is their guy and that Sidney would have to dethrone him, then you've at least got to have Avonte Maddox getting those first team reps early on and getting into this defense and ready for that position to start, if that's how you see it happening. If Sidney winds up having really good practices and camps, there's always going to be opportunities to get him to run with the first team and see how it goes. But right now you've got the plan like Avonte Maddox as your number 2 corner.
Geoff Mosher joining us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Drops every Monday and Thursday morning, and a special edition dropped this morning with Chiefs GM Brett Veach with the Eagles background. A lot of great content there. Again, the Inside the Birds podcast powers Football at 4 here on 97.3 ESPN. Geoff, kind of sticking on the defense, I'm curious what your thoughts are on what Marquand Manuel said to the media about how, he seemed very complimentary, and some people may be surprised about Jalen Mills and had a lot of good things to say about him. And it seems like Manuel, a guy who's played in the league, seems to be taking a little bit of a different approach in how he talks about the secondary than past guys in the secondary coaching staff.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, that's interesting because, unlike some of the past cornerback coaches they've had or defensive back coaches they've had, Marquand played in the league and played, at least in recent memory. Some people can remember him not only playing with the University of Florida, but then also, I believe, with the Falcons is who he played for, along with being a coach there. So I always notice, and you hear this about Duce Staley as well, right? Guys who played in the league almost have a different temperament as coaches. They tend to be a little bit more rah-rah with their guys and know how to push the buttons because they were out there on the field having their buttons pushed or having their coaches treat them the same way or fellow players who were veterans. So I think he's going to bring an interesting dynamic to this secondary that it really hasn't had. Now, Tim Hawk also played, but I mean, he's the safeties guy. So Marquand's in charge of the corners. And so it'll be, plus he's also been a defensive coordinator. So I think that it's a different perspective and it's one that the players will probably cling to and enjoy, especially if they're playing well and getting that good feedback. And Jalen Mills is interesting because even before Marquand had done his Zoom today, I was starting to hear some good things. And we're going to talk about that on the Inside the Birds podcast, which will drop tomorrow morning, our normal one that drops Thursday morning at 6 a.m., me and Adam, because we'll have some updates on guys who are and what they're doing in camp for the past few days. And Jalen Mills is a guy whose name came up, and it's a little surprising to me in that I didn't know how he would acclimate. I felt it was good to move him away from the outside because he's clearly lacks the top end speed to be an outside corner. He can be exposed. I thought moving to the inside as a hybrid defender would be good, but I wasn't sure that he'd be able to be a starting safety and play all the roles. I thought maybe Will Parks, because of his experience, would have that edge, even though he's a newcomer. But I've heard very good things about Mills and how they're using him, and I'll expand on that a little bit more in the podcast. But it's encouraging to hear Jalen has come back and really embraced this role and will have a role going into the years if he keeps this up.
You also mentioned Duce Staley, and I can't help but think how many times I've heard you talk about the fact that, Duce is a guy that, could be a coach in this league, about how players gravitate to him, how they listen to him. He talked about how grateful he was for the opportunity to, basically run the team with Doug out for those handful of days. Even though he was taking Doug's kind of marching orders, it was Duce kind of executing as the commanding officer, at least, in the building. And I have to wonder, considering the things you and Adam have talked about on the Inside the Birds podcast, could this be setting up for maybe Duce to be getting one of those head coaching jobs next year because of the experience he had this offseason?
It should, Josh. I mean, a lot of that was said about Eric Bieniemy, and this past offseason, he wasn't able to get a head coaching job. So I still think he'll always have to battle the stigma of A, being a running back, and B, not being an offensive coordinator. And it's kind of silly because there are some really successful coaches in this league who are not coordinators on one side of the ball, offense or defense. John Harbaugh was a special teams coordinator, just like Joe Judge from the Giants. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't think Mike Tomlin, when he came to the Steelers, was defensive coordinator with where did he come from? Minnesota, was it? All
Minnesota,
of a sudden I'm blanking, but
he was under Leslie Frazier.
Right. He was not I think he was the linebackers coach, if I'm not mistaken, but he was someone who was considered a good leader of men, a good football mind, and someone who can command a locker room. And that's Duce Staley. Duce Staley can command a locker room. He's not a ghost. He played recently enough for people to remember. And when you walk through the halls of NovaCare and you see pictures and artwork of guys who were responsible for that, rise to power in the 2000s under Andy, Duce Staley is one of them, and he's got pictures all over the place, and people know who he is, and they really appreciate. He's a very candid guy, very blunt, very candid, and I think I always hear players say, I don't care if it's bad news, just tell me the news. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't lead me astray. And Duce has always been known for being straightforward and very straightforward. You know where you stand with Duce Staley. Maybe, Gabe Kapler, not so much. Duce Staley, yes, you absolutely know when you're in hot water. So I think that it makes sense that he would be someone who should be in line for a head coaching job. And not to mention that Eagles running backs over the last 3 or 4 years, whether it's been a committee, whether it's been one guy getting the ball, they've all done fairly well. I mean, Wendell Smallwood a couple of years ago wound up being their lead carrier for a couple of games and was able to move the chain. So Corey Clement was a Super Bowl hero. So whoever has had the ball for them has done a pretty good job. And, we may nitpick on a game-to-game basis about rotations or this or that, but Duce has maximized the talent out of that position. And I do really think that he deserves more of a look for a job, and we'll see if it happens.
How dare you bring up Gabe Kapler? How
Just for
dare
you?
But Duce Staley, and tying Duce Staley with Miles Sanders, he stated that the mental focus of Miles Sanders is just unbelievable. And I'm really intrigued for what Miles Sanders is going to be this year, but I feel like the hype around him is higher than maybe my expectations. Is there another league in the back that he relates to that is at the top of this league, or is he his own unique personality out there? I'm just trying to get, his ceiling. How high is his real ceiling, and does that compare to anybody else out there right now?
That's a really good question, Hunter, because I've had the same kind of thoughts and concerns. Certainly we on our podcast, on the Inside the Birds podcast, have talked up Miles Sanders in year 2. And, there was a long period in there where we weren't sure if there was going to be football, right? We're talking about June and July, and there wasn't much to talk about. And I felt like our conversations naturally gravitated toward Miles Sanders and his development. But you can understand why. It's because the moves that the Eagles didn't make at running back in the offseason certainly reflected that for the first time, they had one guy that they believe can be their next kind of 3-down running back. Their next Westbrook, their next LaShawn McCoy, their next Duce Staley. And that's really good company. So it's hard not to get excited when the organization sends that kind of message. And then, of course, ever since training camp started, it's only been validated by what you've heard from Duce and Doug and other teammates. So are we probably all guilty of maybe overhyping him a little bit for a guy who's had 1 year? Maybe it's possible, but I think there's some good reason and validation for that, because this team expects a lot out of him, and he showed up in great shape, and they're ready to roll with him, and they need him. And I don't know, when you say who does he compare to in this league, I don't want to get. That's where we get a little bit like if I say, well, he runs the ball really well and catches the ball really well, and Christian McCaffrey does that, I don't want people to think that now all of a sudden I'm turning Miles Sanders into Christian McCaffrey. But I do know that this team has talked, and even before he got hurt yesterday, they were using him in situations where he was lining up in the slot and running routes as a receiver and catching some passes. That's stuff they did with Brian Westbrook also. So I just think that he's one of those versatile halfbacks who you see out there who can run, who can catch, who can do a lot of things. Whether he's going to be as good as McCaffrey, that remains to be seen. They don't use running backs the way Carolina has had to use Christian McCaffrey. So I don't know if you'll ever see him getting 2,000, 2,100 yards or anything like that. But from a skill set standpoint, it appears that they feel Miles can handle pretty much anything that they throw at him.
He's Geoff Mosher, the Inside the Birds podcast every Monday and Thursday morning. It drops. I'll have a new one dropping tomorrow, of course. Before then, you can catch the great conversation with Brett Veach right now on the podcast list. Follow Geoff on Twitter at Geoff Mosher NFL for all your Eagles and NFL news. There's all guests. He appeared here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Geoff, great stuff today.
Hey, thanks, Josh. Real quick, I just want to let everybody know Monday is going to be a big day. This coming Monday, the 24th for Inside the Birds. We're going to have a few announcements, and we're looking forward to sharing a lot of good news with our listeners on Monday. So I'm excited for that, and I just wanted to give everybody a heads up.
I like good news. I like hearing that.
Well, we're happy to have it for you.
All right, Geoff joins us every Monday and Wednesday. Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. So you have tomorrow all the notes. Then you have Monday, you got the big news. And, of course, Brett Veach today drops. And they got a lot going on Inside the Birds podcast. Football at 4 here on 97.3 ESPN. Football at 4 being brought to you by PlaySugarHouse.com. Sign up now and they'll match your first deposit up to $250. Go to PlaySugarHouse.com and win real money with their sports book along with casino games for the comfort of your home. Must be 21 in order to play. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.